But let's get to the main event. The reason we're all here is Christina Wodtke. I'm super excited to have her here. I've known her for a while. She's awesome. She's currently a professor at California College of the Arts. She's done so many amazing things that barely fit on the slide. She's worked at LinkedIn and Zynga and MySpace and Yahoo in both design and product roles. I didn't even know this. Like, founder of Boxes and Arrows, so you guys may have ended up with some awesome article on Boxes and Arrows. It's a great website with a lot of great content. And she writes her own great posts at eleganthack.com. You should definitely subscribe to her blog. So a long time ago, she wrote this book on information architecture, and then I already told you about her new book, Radical Focus. Her handle's @CWodtke there, so definitely use that. And she's going to talk to us about, like I said, the ideas from her next book, Beyond OKRs, the formula for high-performing teams. So let's give her a big warm welcome to Christina. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much for coming out tonight. I know there's a lot of Design Week stuff going on in San Francisco tonight, so it's awesome to see such an incredible showing. So I have a Richard Saul Wurman story. Now, I don't know if you know who Richard Saul Wurman is. He was an architect who was the first guy to coin the term information architecture, but you might know him because he started a successful little conference called TED. So he started TED, and he was actually at the Information Architecture Summit, which is a very tiny conference. They asked him to keynote, and he just hung out the whole time. He was talking to people. He was sitting in the lobby. Let's be honest, he's kind of holding court. Now, Richard Saul Wurman has a reputation of being a little bit of a, let's use the word curmudgeon, okay? And I was sitting there with a bunch of other people asking him questions, and I said, hey, Mr. Wurman, I like to put on conferences too. Can you give me any advice on how to put on a good conference? And he said no. I thought, well, his reputation is accurate. And then he paused, dramatic pause, and he said, I can't tell you because you would have to follow me around for weeks. He said, I design the menu, I hire the chef, I design the furniture, I have the music composed. And I thought, this is a guy who never takes the package deal. He never does the hotel with the chairs that have been tied together. He never takes the airplane chicken or salmon choices. He designs everything. Now, when he designs something, something extraordinary happens. And we all think about continuous improvement, right? We're trying to innovate. We're not taking the package deal. We're reinventing, like we heard about reinventing hosting and reinventing user research. Why aren't we reinventing teams? So I've been to a lot of companies, and you know, as Dan mentioned, and I've been, you know, the sad little junior member on the team that everybody kicks around, and I've been the senior team leader, and I've ran the team, and I've been the scary person that you come to explain why things aren't going to be on time. And what I noticed is that, think of the last team you went to it. You all got in a room for the kickoff, right? And people just went, okay, so what are we going to do? Like, nobody ever discussed how are we going to work together. And this is a real problem, and it's getting to be a harder and harder problem as we become more diverse. So if you're making something more complicated than a chair, you need a team. Guess what? If you're making a chair, you need a team. There's got to be somebody who's going to market it, somebody's going to produce it. We need teams for everything. There is no lone genius anymore. That myth is out the door. And a great team needs to be diverse. You guys have all heard it, right? Like, teams need to be diverse. We need lots of different people. And then we see Hamilton, and boom. Okay, now we have proof. It works on Broadway. It can work in the Silicon Valley. One of the things that makes it hard for a diverse group to work together, and when I saw this chart, it kind of blew my mind, was this idea of high context and low context. Now, what that means is if you've ever been a person like me, United States is literally the lowest context country in the world. You've been in a room with somebody from China or Japan, and they're just sitting there very quietly, and they're not saying anything. And you're like, are they mad at me? Are they shy? What's going on? And it's because they enter into a conversation from a position of context. They're going to look at your face. They know who's the boss, who's not the boss, who has the power, who doesn't have the power, and they're going to wait for you to make space for them to enter into the conversation. Meanwhile, us Americans, we're talking on top of each other, we're interrupting each other, back and forth. And every country has a different degree of this. For example, the English think the French are disorganized, and the Germans think the English are disorganized. So we all have these different ideas of how the world's supposed to work, right? In some places, it's very rude to interrupt. In other places, you're just expressing who you are. Then on top of it all, we have corporate culture. Now, when I worked at Yahoo, it was a very passive-aggressive company. At Yahoo, you had to talk to everybody who might have a say in a project, and by the time you were done talking to the last person, you had to go back to the first person in case they changed their mind in order to launch something. And then I went to Zynga. Zynga was a very aggressive company where everybody argued, yelled, got into a room, screamed, drank a bunch of tequila afterwards, and moved on with their life. And I grew up in Iowa, so I found Yahoo a little easier to navigate. I landed somewhere in between, but in Zynga there were rules and they weren't the same rules as Yahoo. So you can see how everybody's walking around with all these ideas of how rules work. This is a really powerful chart from the book, The Culture Map. And what's interesting is even cultures where you think they might be very similar, for example, China and Japan, at least we Americans would, you suddenly realize, yeah, they're very high context, but in Japan, decisions are going to be consensual, and in China, they're going to be top down. So there are all these points, even beyond high context, low context, in which we have areas where we have an idea of how the world's supposed to work, and somebody else has an idea of how the world's supposed to work, and they are not the same idea. So I did a sketch based on Stuart Brand's shearing layers, which is the idea that over time, different parts of a building become misaligned. And I think about all the things that we can become misaligned with people. Like we have our nature, maybe we're an introvert or an extrovert, and that doesn't change a lot. We have the country we came from. We have the region. New Yorkers are not Southerners, right? We have our family, the stories our families tells. We've got corporate, we've got department. At Zynga, in our platform group, on Friday at the end of the day, we'd all get together and we'd eat wine and cheese. One day I went to the biz dev department on Friday, and they were all standing in a circle, and everybody had to brag about something and do a shot of tequila. And if you didn't have anything to brag about, the person next to you would steal your shot. So even within a company, different groups will have different rules, right? So there's so much going on here. And I will say, if you do not actively design your team's behavior, you will default, and everybody has a different default, so you're going to clash. So I'm going to cover two concepts. One is different kinds of teams, and then how to design the team you actually want. So I think about this as evolution, but you don't have to evolve. You don't always need a mindful team. Sometimes you just need a work group. I'm going to talk about these different kinds of teams. So a work group is a group of people who all have skills. They basically work independently, and there's one person who will coordinate them. Think of a sales department or maybe a customer care department. Everybody's kind of doing their own little thing. They have a strong, clearly focused leader, individual accountability, individual work products. Measures its effectiveness indirectly. So a team is the next level, right? What makes a team? This is from The Wisdom of Teams, which is sort of the undisputed best book on teams so far. I say so far because I like to aim high. It has a common purpose, performance goals, complementary skills, and mutual accountability. Now, when I read this, I saw those first two, and I said to myself, that sounds a little familiar. That sounds like OKRs. If you know anything about OKRs, you'll know that the objective is a qualitative goal. That's a common purpose, right? Like an inspirational goal. And then success criteria, which is performance goals, numerical. Okay, so OKRs can be the part of building a good team. And this is a great example of it. You know, we have something that's established clear value, very qualitative, and then actual hard numbers of goals that we should actually try to meet. Complementary skills. I remember when I had my startup and I was raising money and I was talking to an angel, and he drew this on the whiteboard, and he said, I will not invest in a company unless they've solved these three skills. I have to have someone who is product, and by product he meant knows the customers. I know there's some designers here today. They might say that's my job, but you know, it's not really so much of a job description as a role. Somebody has to understand the customer. Somebody has to understand the market. We need somebody who understands implementation. We need somebody who understands the tech. And we need somebody who knows the business. And this is complementary skills. And mutual accountability. So in the work group, remember, we got one person who's coordinating everything. In a team, people should be able to talk to each other. They should be working collectively, right? They hold each other accountable. And I will say that in a dysfunctional team, you have the thing where the engineer doesn't have the designs he needs to be able to code, and so he tells the product manager, go get me those designs, and he's really angry. That's a work group. That's not a team. The engineer should be able to yell at the designer for himself. That's healthy. So collective, I started thinking, maybe we need something else where people do take care of each other. So I call it the collective. i.e. the non-dysfunctional team. So I don't know if you're familiar with Bruce Tucker's developmental sequence, in which we form, we're throwing the room together, right? And then we storm, we fight, and eventually we norm and perform, and then adjourning is when we reach the end of the task that we've been gathered together. So in a collective, we're going to share the leadership roles, we're going to have individual mutual accountability, collective work products, open-end discussion. We're going to talk to each other. There's a lot of words for we're going to talk to each other. We're actually going to decide things together, right? So now we're a really healthy team. And if we were all pulled together to do one project, that could be enough. Like, we've been gathered together, we put together the marketing plan for a new product, and we dissolve. But a lot of teams just keeps going, right? Leadership teams or a product team. So now we want to do something more. We want to become a learning team. I thought about calling this a lean team because the secret of a learning team is continuous improvement, right? This is the lean product start group. So what if we take those 5 steps and we think about turning them into a cycle, like the lean startup? We're formed, we fought a lot, we normed, now we're doing great. Do we have the courage to break that? Sometimes a bone will heal wrong, and we have to break it to let it heal into a healthier shape. So the team will constantly be asking ourselves, okay, we're comfortable doing this, but is there a better way? Can we try something new? Can we collectively collect our requirements? Can we test faster? You know, a learning team is constantly asking, is the way we're doing it the right way? And this is based on a model, I got this from the Stanford Business School, which is called experiential learning. And so we do a lot of things, but we don't always learn from them. So what we have to do is, if we wish to learn from the activities we're engaging in, we have to stop and say, what just happened? Have we quantified it? Do we actually know what we've observed? So what? Does it actually matter? So many people look at numbers and they're just like, ooh, numbers. No, does this actually matter? And then now what? What are we going to try next? How are we going to experiment? And if you think this looks a little like the lean startup cycle, yeah, it's older. It's something we see a lot. And of course, you do recognize this, I hope, these are our experiments. By writing it down, we can increase our learning speed and our learning effectiveness, so we can become a smarter team. We can do this for what we do for ourselves, as well as what we do with our product experiments. Now, there's an old joke, which is there is no I in team, but I'm going to say, for the very highest level of a team, you have to put the I back in. We have to take care of ourselves as an us, and we have to take care of each other as individuals. And I'm going to go into that a little bit farther in. So I want to just take a quick minute, like literally just 2 minutes. Think to yourself, think of 3 teams that you work with or you're a part of. Are they a work group? Are they a team? Are they a collective? Are they a learning team? Or are they a mindful team? Just because this is a pyramid, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it doesn't mean mindful is the best or every team should be that. Just sometimes you just need to eat and sleep. Other times you can head all the way up for enlightenment. But you know, it depends on what the team actually needs, but you do have to solve one before you can solve the next one. And that's why it's a pyramid, okay? So we're going to talk a little bit about team building. So we're going to talk about trust falls. No, never. Are you kidding me? Well, there'll be no trust falls on my watch. No. So as I've been running a lot of teams, and then I started a literature review, and as a child of many librarians, I don't even want to tell you how many librarians there are in my family tree. You know, the first thing I did when I tried to figure out why we were having so much of a hard time getting along is I started digging through the literature. And I saw these patterns that would come up over and over and over again. And so I quantified them and I came up with this diagram. It's still in the ugly but useful stage. Someday it may become beautiful as well as useful. But there are 3 key elements of the team you want to actively design to have an effective team, which is goals, roles, and norms. And then I took Tuckman's stages, I narrowed it down to the form, perform, and adjourn. And we're going to go through each one of these and talk about them. Now, as I mentioned, I think that OKRs are really good for goals, so we'll hit on that fairly lightly. But let's start with form. Okay, so form, it's done once, right, at the beginning. However, probably a lot of you guys are already in teams, right? And so if you want to start working at a higher level of performance, even though you're with a team that you think is sort of creaky or it's a work group and it's time to take it to the next level, you might want to create a formal kicking off moment. The beginning of a quarter is a good time. So it's usually done once, but it could be, you could take a moment where it's like, okay, we just ended this project. Let's see if we can try to do something better next time, right? You can find those windows to reboot, so to speak. I think OKRs cover form, perform, adjourn. I'm not going to talk about them very much tonight. There's books that are written about it. There's articles. You don't have to buy the book. You can go on Elegant Hack, and there's like 40 articles. I write like a maniac, so, you know. But you could buy the book, and then I would love you more. Okay, so we need to set the expertise roles. Now, one of the things that drives me completely insane, one of the many things that drives me completely insane, is when we're ready to say who's going to be on this team. Okay, we need a designer, an engineer, and what do we do when we're going to hire somebody? We go on the web, we find a description, we edit a couple things in it, we get a bunch of people, we're like, I like that guy, you like that guy, okay, we're kind of done. Like, we're kind of like a mess when we hire people. And there's a concept called a position profile that I've been working on with some HR folks. And they're not all evil. Some of them are lovely, brilliant people, okay? So my best friends are HR people. And we've actually come up with this model that we've been testing out in which we define the role. So we basically do Post-it notes, and we have 9 key items. We have 3 hard skills, 3 soft skills, and 3 wish list skills. So if you had an engineer, what were the 3 things you absolutely had to do? What are the 3 soft skills? Can talk to humans, you know, whatever, can communicate clearly, you know, whatever the soft skills you think should be there. And then wish skills. What would that look like? What does it look like when something has caused that rule to be evoked? And as a manager, you say, okay, this hard skill, does it need to be grown? Does it need to be replaced? The soft skill, does it need to be grown? Does it need to be replaced? Should we start working on the wish list skills? Do we need to add one? Every week, you're constantly re-examining and questioning what is the nature of the role. And then when you come to performance review time, you do 2 things. You look at how they contributed to the OKRs, and are they fulfilling their position profile? The torture that we put ourselves through to write a job description, to write it once and throw it out, is ridiculous. Let everybody live their role. Let people live that function. Informal roles. So on a team, when the team gets together, we know who the designer is and who's the engineer, but do we know who the facilitator is? How about the tiebreaker? Spokesperson, you know, who's going to go up in front of the, you know, CEO or VP or general manager? Schedule keeper? Office housework. You know what happens if we do not decide who's going to fill these informal roles or decide to rotate them? Just saying, there's been a lot of studies that show that women do the bulk of the office housework. And of course, the tallest guy makes all the decisions. Like, we will default into our stereotypes unless we actively decide to work as a collective team. If you do not design, you default. So, norms. We'll talk about norms for just a second. Norms are the unspoken role. When I talked about an Asian person who, you know, I teach, I have a lot of exchange students, they will never speak up in class unless I call on them by name. You know, at first I was kind of freaked out. I'm like, why are they so quiet? Are they plotting to kill me? I know I'm a difficult professor. Later I realized I had to say, hey, you know, wait, what do you think of this idea? You know, and now it's fine. And actually I taught them to call on each other, which is even more amazing. So all the students now ask each other. But we had to put that out in the world. Like, how do you know when it's your turn to talk? How do you know when it's your turn to listen? These are all norms, and everybody has different ideas of how things work. Okay, so I'm going to continue on. I want to talk a little bit about performing. Okay, so now we've got our roles. We figured out, you know, who's going to facilitate. Are we going to have an agenda? You know, who's going to make the coffee? Who's going to order the lunch? We figured out what we think is a good norm set. Are we going to allow for interrupting? The thing about learning about cultural differences is there's no right or wrong way to do things. Interrupting can be perfectly fine in one place, and it can be the worst sin in another place. As long as we all agree this is how we're going to be, that's fine. So with OKRs, every single week we say, what are we doing towards our goals, and how confident we are we going to make them. So there's a weekly cadence. Feedback. Feedback is a really tough one, and I want to spend most of my time talking about that. I will say There's a good way to adjust the norms. It's retrospective. But let's talk about feedback for a little bit, because making sure that we're living up to the roles that we've been assigned or that we have selected for ourselves is really critical. And it's really hard to do. So there's two kinds of feedback in a team. There's individual membered feedback, and then there is how are we collectively? How are we doing collectively? So if you think about feedback in a corporate setting, it happens once a year, annual performance review, right? And we gather all the information, and we do a 360, and then we present it to the person and tell them if they got a bonus or not, and then they're really angry, and everybody's bitter and resentful and trying to figure out who said the bad thing about them, and the entire company shuts down for a couple months. That's how it was when I was at Yahoo many years ago. I'm sure it's much better now. I can't do that with a straight face. So when I worked at Zynga, and there are many things Zynga does right, and there's many things they did wrong. They grew fast, they crashed hard. That means both things happened. I'm happy to talk off camera about those things. But one of the things I think they really did right was they did quarterly feedback. It shortened the cycle. So when I was first hired at Zynga, I had this young woman who was working for me. And when I got hired, everybody told me the same thing. You're going to have to fire her. You need to fire her. She's no good. You're going to have to fire her. My first thought was, why didn't you fire her? Why is that my first job when I get here? And so I was like, okay, I can suck it up. And I talked to everybody, and I collected all the feedback and made sure it was all behavioral. And I had a really clear list, and I sat down with her because, you have to put something on a PIP, and it's going to take like 90 days or what have you. And I gave her the feedback, and I said this, this, and this. And she just looked at me, not crying, so not crying, and goes, nobody ever told me this. Why didn't anybody tell me this? And she took the feedback and she changed, and she got good. She didn't have to go on a PIP at all. She just needed somebody to tell her what she was doing right and what she was doing wrong. And I was so angry at that moment. And I realized that we hate giving feedback because it makes us feel bad, but not giving feedback can destroy people. So we need fast feedback. We've got to tighten the cycles, but not too fast. We don't want to do it in anger, just quick. So the nice thing about doing fast feedback, like a quarterly performance review, is it reduces the quantity of information. My gosh, when you're doing your annual, there's 50 things, or 40 good things about you and 20 bad things because they're trying to do a shit sandwich, only it's like a spreadsheet, right? Reduce the distance between the action, the thing you did, and the evaluation. I was convinced my boss only was evaluating me in the last quarter because they couldn't remember back that far, right? And then, of course, reduce the stakes. If you can get a bonus every quarter, you don't get this bonus this quarter, it's okay. You can turn it around. You don't have to wait a whole year until you get your next raise. So the shorter cycle is significantly healthier for the company. The other thing that happens is when we give feedback, it's prompted by emotion, right? We're angry, we're frustrated. We need to be able to catch it in the very moment it happens so that people can react to it. So we get a prompt to emotion, and we have to observe, I'm really, really angry. What are the stories I'm telling? Am I saying this person's a jerk? What's going on with this fury? And when you're calmed down, you go, okay, this behavior was not acceptable to me for this reason. Then you can contextualize it. Why would they do such a thing? Are we having a culture clash? Or are they having a bad day? The old saying, be kind to everybody you meet, for they too are fighting a great battle. People have bad days. Does this happen over and over again? Maybe it's time for an intervention. Put it in context of what you know about this person and how they're behaving. And then communicate it clearly. So this is a model from Matt Abrams, who teaches at GSB. And he says, information, importance, invitation to solve, and implications. You tell them what they did. I saw this behavior. It's important because I was ready to kill you. Invitation to solve. I'd like it if you cut it out. Implications. If not, I'm not going to work with you anymore. That could be a peer-to-peer one. As a boss, I might be a little more elegant. I could say, you're continuously late in delivering your designs. This is causing the engineers to be late, and by the time we get to the web devs, they have 24 hours to code the interface, and they stay up all night, and their wife is ready to divorce them. I think we shouldn't be making our web devs suffer like this. Could we fix this problem? Can you help me understand why you're getting these designs in so late? Otherwise, we may have to work with a different designer. That's a classic consequences sentence, right? So I tend to be fairly casual with it because I find the super fancy GSB language a little bit much sometimes. So when you behavior, I reaction and consequences, right? When you do this thing, it affects people this way. If you don't change, like you do. So team feedback, we have to think about us. How are we as a group doing? So retrospective, woo, we all love retrospective, right? You just put up keeps and changes. The plus is keeps, the triangle stands for delta, which means change. What happened last week that we think are working for us? What experiment do we want to run next week? It's a beautiful thing. Retrospective is awesome. Agile, baby. Team check-ins, a more formal one, is really critical. We need to step back a little bit and reflect about every quarter. So this comes from Spotify, and they say quarterly seems to be a good starting point for large team check-ins. Every month is too often. People get sick of it. Biannually seems too seldom. Too much happens. I found over and over again that businesses already have a quarterly cycle, and you can close a quarter and open a quarter really effectively for things like OKRs, team check-ins, things like that. It's sort of a natural cycle. When I've run these, we usually do an empathy warm-up. So for touchy-feely companies, we can do this method from nonviolent communication. We pretend we're both sitting in a car. Now one of the seats goes all the way around, so we can't see each other, but we can hear each other. And one person finishes the sentence over and over again. Sometimes I pretend. And we don't tell them what to say. They do it for 2 minutes. Sometimes I pretend I'm Superman. Sometimes I know if that skirt goes with those shoes. Sometimes I pretend I know what I'm doing. Sometimes I pretend it's all going to end well. People go for a little while. They tend to open up. Then the next person does it. Sometimes I'm afraid. Now I know what you're thinking. This is some crazy touchy-feely crap. That will never work in my company. And I understand that it's a bit on the edge. Maybe you don't want to start there. Other empathy ones can be share what you wanted to be when you grew up, right? Share what your actual first job was and what did you learn from it. That one's always been a great one because I've heard crazy stories about babysitting and fast food. But you need some way to become people first, right? There's a couple different methods that I'm experimenting right now, and I'm still in process. I would love to hear feedback. This is the Carbon 5 dartboard. Every team member takes this dartboard back, and they fill it in. So do we think we're on target in our understanding of our MVP? Do we feel like we're getting enough challenge as a group? It has different segments. The Spotify one is another fantastic one. It comes from the Spotify squads. They came up with all these things that they believe is important. What I like about this one is there's 2 levels. The team actually decides what they're going to rate themselves on, and then they rate themselves. They put those cards up on the left, and then everybody checks where they think they are on each of these. And then you can kind of, especially if you're working in a larger company, I know there's a few people with larger companies, they can see overall how are the different teams doing health-wise. Now, I will tell you, this is qualitative data. It is not standardized. Some teams may be tough on themselves. Some teams may be overly kind to themselves. But at least you know there's a few people you should have a conversation with. You should probably talk to the reds and the yellows and get a little more information about what's going on there and why do they feel they're struggling and where are they struggling. Qualitative information is a clue. You guys can all be Hercule Poirot and use the clue to solve mysteries of why are we struggling. Team member feedback. This is literally the scariest thing I've done. I've done it with a few teams. It's proven to be very powerful. This comes out of the empathy map. So this is a classical empathy map as explained by Dave Gray. It's used with customer information. You do it to paint a portrait of a user at a moment. I took this for teams and I made a couple changes. I changed here to see and hear, and I turned this into say and do, and this is pains and gains. And then I put keeps and changes. And what happens is everybody draws this picture. They put it on a wall, on a flip chart. And then imagine we've got 5 people here, right? Each with these charts. I move over with Post-it notes for 2 minutes. I try to fill in everything about you. 2 minutes over, I try to fill in the chart with you. And you're now working on someone else. And then eventually I come back to me, and it's completely filled with a picture of how my team sees me. And what happens is when I'm trying to imagine how you feel, when I'm trying to imagine what you hear every day, when I go down to keeps and changes, I'm in an empathic place where I'm much more likely to give you constructive feedback. So first we create the empathy, then we create the feedback. And I've been using this for a while, and I will say crying has been known to happen. People really feel seen, they feel appreciated, they feel cared for, and when it gets to what should I change, they're in a place emotionally where that feedback from a teammate is so much more powerful than a boss saying, change this, or, you know, it means something. It's in context. And again, I know this is touchy-feely, but this has been working incredibly well for me. This is a sketch note done by one of my students. Like I said, I experiment on the students first because they can't run away, and then I take it to my corporate clients. And this is terrible. But one of my students, he'd been really struggling, and he was just kind of sleeping through class. And then and I'd talked to him multiple times, but when his teammates actually talked to him, he was like, oh, I'm hurting people. And he turned it around. He became a badass. So there was something very wonderful about seeing someone able to finally hear information. Finally, adjourn. If you think I should change the name, I'm wondering if I should, but there is a regular close the quarter, take a moment, step back, breathe. That's what the team feedback process is. It's a bigger process. We're going to grade our OKRs. Did we make them? Did we not make them? How well did we do? We're going to promote or fire people. And we're going to look at our norm rules, and we can change them, or we can codify them. So one more story. When I first started at MySpace, there was this guy, and everybody said, you can't fire him. Can't fire him. He knows too much. He knows where the bodies are buried. He understands that one piece of tech. He's the only guy. And I was like, okay, I get it. You know, talked to him, learned a bunch of stuff from him. And then I'd see him complaining all the time. Things were so much better when Tom was here. Those new guys don't know anything. And he'd just sit in his office doing nothing. And one day I walked in and I said, I'm sorry this isn't working out. I'm going to have to let you go. And he said, I've been waiting for you to do that. What took you so long? Went and did a startup. And everything got better. The teams that were depressed got energized again. They recommitted. You know, it made everything better. One person whining all the time makes everybody depressed. So sometimes if everybody says you can't fire someone, that's the person you most want to fire. Scares me when people have that much power. So just to wrap up, we have team evolution. You got to know, what are you designing for? What do you want? What does this team have to do? How good do they have to be? If you're a management team, if you're a startup and a group of founders, you should be mindful. I'm just going to say it right out loud. Like, if you're a leadership team, you should be taking care of each other as people, constantly coaching each other, growing each other, and making sure that you as a group are doing the best you can. Again, goals, roles, and norms. Form at the beginning, perform, check in every week, adjourn every quarter, step way the heck back, and think about things. The feedback loop, observe, contextualize, communicate. Do it as fast as you possibly can. Although you shouldn't give out raises every week. I know startups don't do that. Okay, but quarterly, not too bad. Design all the things. Do it. Thank you. Okay, so we do some Q&A, Dan?
Yeah, we'll do Q&A. So we like to use mics so everybody can hear it, and it picks it up on the video. So thanks for an awesome talk, Christina. I'm sure people have a lot of questions from all these great frameworks.
They look stunned or thirsty.
So when you're designing a team, that makes a lot of sense, you know, the design versus default. And you want to involve the team in the design of the team. Can you talk through some of the approaches or structures or ways that you might
Absolutely.
tackle that?
So teams should design themselves and design their behavior themselves. So unfortunately, we don't always get to choose our team members. Let's be honest. Like, how often do you get to pick your own team? Like, I think that's happened never in my career. Usually I have a handful of people that I'm given to, and then I can, maybe if I'm lucky, I hire one or two more in, or I steal somebody. So the people who are actually there, you're dealt a hand, and now you're ready to start playing the game. Like, it's just kind of how it is, especially if you're a product manager, then you're really screwed. So you got whatever you got, but taking a moment at the beginning of the meeting to say, hey, guys, let's just take a couple of minutes to talk about, you know, how we want to be as a team. What do we want to be as a team? And you don't have to say, we're going to do this giant process. Just say, let's take a couple of minutes and figure out how we're going to interact with each other. And that simple exercise you just did, like, give them 2 minutes and think of the worst team you've ever been in, write it down. I have also done the yell it out approach with a larger group. So that's when I'm like, okay, you know, think of a bad group. Okay, tell me some of the things you've seen, and I'll write them all out on the wall. That's how I started doing it. I was actually taught this methodology by Andrew Plott, who used to teach Obama's recruitment team, and he would build the teams this way. And he's the one who taught me to use this methodology. And then I've adapted it since to use in classrooms as well. So you can either yell it out or you can write it down on Post-it notes. Post-it notes are more introvert friendly. And then you do the hate, and then you have them make the rules. And you write it down on a piece of paper. I recommend crappy butcher paper. Do not let your designer make a poster. Posters don't get drawn on. You want something crappy they can draw on. And it just goes up, you know. It can live on the wall, or you can put it up whenever you have a meeting, and you just keep fixing it. Doing that one thing, before you do anything else, will create a mind shift. It will tell the team the house rules belong to everybody and not you, the boss. It will also lead to conversations. If somebody says no interrupting, and somebody's like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean no interrupting? We always, you know, everybody throws out their ideas when they have it. You get to have a conversation about who likes it, who doesn't like it. You can even do a vote, you know. I always ask the question, how are we going to enforce these? When we see something going on, does everybody have the right to say this is not okay? That's really important. What does it look like is a really important question. Like if somebody says facilitation or make difficult conversations a format, I'm like, let's talk more. What does that look like? How will that work? They need to be concrete, and everybody has to feel like they can live it. If you do that, then the team starts becoming activated. They start feeling ownership. And then we can move to other things. We could collect, like if we have a new hire, we could have everybody put in, what do I think our designer should be able to do? And again, I use Post-it notes because they're very introvert friendly. Everybody writes down the things they want, we do a sort, and then we put together the job description. But the more you hand over decisions to the team, the more they'll make them without you. And that's a good thing, that's a positive thing. The reason I originally went to OKRs was because I wanted to figure out how to scale. And if you micromanage and tell people what to do and not to do, you run out of scale very quickly. And when I learned about it at Zynga, because John Doerr brought it to Zynga as well as to Google, I got really excited because you just tell people what you want to happen and let them figure it out. So you hire A players and you leave them alone. You say, go take that hill, and they take the hill. So those are just some exercises that work really well. After a while, I find that people start making up new exercises and they start iterating. The Spotify one's another really great one. You don't have to make fancy cards. You could just draw out our 8 values and then have everybody vote on are we doing it well or not at the end of the quarter. That's another one that's really simple and easy to do. That's just a couple, but the more you do, the more they'll want, and then they'll run themselves. Sir?
How many norms?
How many norms?
Yeah.
So the rules have usually gone until we ran out of butcher paper. So they tend to be 10 to 20. So it's like a flip chart. You can kind of hear when people are tired. You know, I don't know. I haven't seen a team that's gone longer than 12. Sometimes I'll push them a little bit. Like I'll be like, okay, can meetings start late? Should meetings start exactly at 12 o'clock? How long should be our longest meetings? Like I'll actually ask really, really functional questions, because sometimes if people aren't willing to put up their rules, just asking a couple questions like that are really great. Should we, like I've had people say, we should break 15 minutes before the end because I can never get to my next meeting, or we should start 10 minutes late because our campus is so huge, I can't get across the campus in that much time. And if everybody knows that the meeting that's at 12 o'clock, it starts at 12:10, nobody's mad. Nobody's like, I've been sitting here for just waiting for you to show up. It ends the resentment. There's an understanding. So sometimes to warm them up, I'll set up some, but you can have a bunch of rules, but at the end of the quarter, you're gonna be like, did we live up to this one? I've had people like say, we didn't say this rule right. It's not working. Let's restate it. Let's change it. Or let's ditch this one. It's stupid. Or we already do this. We don't actually have to say it. You know, it doesn't matter how many, although I think 50 would be hard. And you could ask people like, really 50 rules, guys? Are we really going to live up to this? 3 rules, is that all we need? But if the team thinks so, then trust it as a hypothesis and spend the quarter testing it and change it when it needs to be changed. Are there other questions?
Yeah, do you have any specific recommendations for distributed teams in different time zones, different locations?
I hate remote. Everybody always asks me about remote, and I'm like, I try never to work on remote. It's over time, I've had to work with more remote teams. The teams that are healthier that work remote get together every quarter. Like WordPress, as far as I can tell, is the healthiest team I've ever seen that's working entirely distributed. And they get together. And when they get together, they spend a lot of time getting to know each other's people, a ton of time. Because that way, when they're talking to each other via Slack or via Skype, they can hear the voice behind the typing. So I would say, if you have a remote team, put in the FaceTime, try to do it quarterly. Annually will not work. I just had a really brutal conversation with somebody. I was like, no, annually, no. Even if it's just the sub-teams getting together quarterly, so at least the people you're most close to, you put in the FaceTime. And I find if you put in that FaceTime, then you can work remotely. But you can do, I've seen people do weekly OKRs using Slack. I've seen them do their celebrations using Slack. I've seen them do their grading and their commitments using Trello. Like, it almost doesn't matter as long as you've made the commitment to know each other as people at a regular interval. It's like a friend, you know? You're like, I could know this friend forever. And then you see them 2 years later and you're like, you got nothing to say. The more often you see each other, the more you have to say. So just make sure that baseline of connection is put in place. Sorry, it's not everybody's favorite answer.
Thank you for this. It's been great. A quick question is, I'm going through interviewing process. How is there a best way to assess what the group norm and culture is as you're interviewing at different companies, and just to get a sense as to for the fit?
So, gosh, I have so many things to say about it. One of the biggest things, something I heard that touched me profoundly, is this idea that instead of culture fit, you should look for culture add. In other words, there's a lot of culture fit to be, I don't know why they're icky, but they are, and it could be because they're a bad guy, or it could be because they look different to me, or they could be because they behave different. Instead, say, what are we missing as a culture? And what could this person bring to us? Could be a fresh point of view, a way of seeing another part of the world, an experience we don't have. So thinking about culture add, how is this person going to enrich us, is really important. Otherwise, we just get a lot more people who are just like us. So that's the first thing to say. Second of all, you could pick, if you've done the norms exercise already, you could pick a couple key norms to talk about. In fact, you could even hand them out. Give everybody 2 of these rules, the group rules, and hand them out to each interviewer and have them talk about, so what do you think about this? What's your behavior? One of the things that's really hard with interviews is people don't agree on what good is. So I would actually suggest that the team who's going to interview make an agreement on what is good, what is a perfect fit, what do they look like, how would we know? And then you have to move to the tell me a story about when. Tell me a story about when you disagreed with a teammate. What did you do? Tell me a story about when you realized you weren't going to hit a deadline. What did you do? It's been shown over and over again, and this is like the most common advice if you've ever had to sit through management training, that don't tell them what would you do, ask what did they do. Get them to tell stories about their past. And if they don't have a story, you can say, well, is there a similar situation that might have been like that? Don't ever move back to what would you do, because we all have ideas about how awesome we would be, if only, but it's much more accurate to ask what actually happened. So, but get the interview team together first, agree on what you're going to ask, agree on what good is, and try to figure out so your scripts are different. Like, it's so depressing to be the person in the interview and everybody's asking you the same question over and over again, and you're like, by the last person, you get really good at that answer, but I'm not sure if it's actually helpful anymore. So, just a couple ideas.
Moved on from OKRs now to the next thing. There's new tools and techniques coming out all the time. So I had some feedback on our team at one point that there was almost like too much iteration, and the team didn't feel a sense of the kind of solidity to our process and our workflow. And so how do you, any insight into how you kind of strike that balance between being iterative and learning and having retrospectives, and at the same time having there be enough of a foundation, you know, where the team doesn't feel completely unmoored every quarter?
I think, well, there's been tons of studies that show that the number one thing that correlates with people's happiness is control. And I think when people feel like they're being jerked around, it's because there's the sexy acronym of the week coming through, and like, we just finally started to figure out how OKRs work, and now we're going to do KPIs or vice versa. So giving the team the power to do the retrospective, to be thoughtful, will change things a lot. And they have to believe, as I was talking to those gentlemen, that they are actually in power, which makes a big difference. Go slow, Try not to do everything all at once. Introduce it as to the team in pieces. Be like, okay guys, what are we bad at? What are we good at? Okay, we're bad at this. Are you up for trying on this methodology? But give them a lot of control. Let's have conversations about it. You can still decide, actually. If everybody's been heard and you believe that the reasons that have come up are valid, then you follow it. But if you think the reasons are not valid, then you can still push forward. I think most of the time you're going to realize the reasons are valid because you're changing too much. So maybe not this quarter, but maybe next quarter. Maybe the reasons are valid because they're wrong about the methodology. Like often you go in and you say, okay, let's do OKRs. Oh my gosh, I had this happen to me recently. I was over at the O'Reilly Accelerator and these guys are like, I hate OKRs. And I'm like, oh, tell me about OKRs. And they're like, oh, well, they told us that our performance review wasn't connected to it, but then when I did these really crazy stretch goals, and then they graded me, and then they told me I wouldn't get a bonus because I didn't make my goals, and they were just really angry because it was done wrong. And like having that conversation, I was like, well, how do you want to run it in your company? You know, let's talk that through. What would be a useful way of approaching it? And so sometimes people react because they've heard the stories, they misunderstand it, they've had a bad experience. Understanding that is very helpful. But people who feel like they're being jerked around get very bitter. So you want to avoid the jerking around. You want to listen, you want to iterate carefully, you want to give them as much control as possible. And so for me, I wrote the book on OKRs, and then people would call me and they'd be like, so how do we do performance reviews? How do I give feedback? And I was like, I'm pretty sure that's not the job of the OKRs. How do you normally do it? And I realized that, you know, OKRs was just a piece of the puzzle, and there were other pieces that were really important to get out as well. So, but you don't have to do them all at once. You can do one, you can add one, you can add another. I say that if you do OKRs, the first thing you need to do is do the Friday celebration, getting everybody together to brag about what they've accomplished that week with a beer or cake. Like that will change the morale of the company completely. With this case, I'd say if you do one thing, have the team set the norms. Just do that one thing. Get them used to the idea of having control, and it will start changing everything. Sometimes just treating people like humans is the first step to having a high-performing team. Fair? I assume Dan will tell us when to shut up.
So a lot of the material that you presented was very relevant to a small unit team where you'd all come together. How does that roll up across a company, maybe even across departments where you have a lot of functions?
Oh, I think I just ruined your recording. Sorry. I just got really warm.
Yeah, so any thoughts on how it applies across larger teams,
Yes.
departments?
All work is done in the smallest unit of groups, which is the team. You have an executive team. You have a project team. You have, like, people are always breaking teams into smaller teams. Like, I've been in companies that have grown from 60 to 250 to 1,000. And they tend, except for Google, which is really flat and kind of complicated, but you tend to have the people you work with regularly. So you can do this for a project base. You can do it for founders, you can do it for leadership team, but you literally can't do it in groups bigger than 25. It becomes something else at that point. I think it's just a work group at that point, except it's a work group of groups, or it's a work group of teams. But it doesn't scale, nor should it. Kind of like Dunbar's number. 250 is the largest number of people you can know. 25 is the largest you can go with this sort of intimate, high-performing team. But I will say, leadership teams rarely think of themselves as teams, and that's got to change. They act like work groups. They all get together, they report to each other, and they don't do the amazing things they could do if they treated each other like a real team. Oh, sorry. Oh, Enslow.
What do you suggest when you're working on a team where there's one member who's kind of functioning on the work group level and the rest of the team is functioning more on like the learning group level, but that member is doing a technology that's really hard to hire for, so it's really hard to, like, they're needed because they're providing this technology that no one else can, but on the other hand, they're just not functioning on a higher level?
The biggest question is, are they hurting the rest of the team? If the rest of the team is fine and they're just the quiet guy in the corner who fixes shit when it breaks, then, but if they're hurting the team, they have to go no matter how high the cost, because the rest of the team will get sick. I mean, that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned, and it's really miserable to hire for that. But you do owe them a PIP. And I used to hate PIPs. I was like, this is a gross thing that HR invented to torture me. And now I love it, because it's like, oh, you're going to force me to have an honest conversation, and you're going to force me to give this person a chance to change. So I try to go into that conversation as early as possible while I still believe they can change, because the longer I put it off, we both know we're doomed, and it's like, you've got 90 days to find another job. So I try to go into that conversation really early, and I say, you know, these are the expectations for you in this role. These are the behaviors I'm observing. Make sure you write them down. And for you to stay working with us, we're going to need that to change. And if you don't feel comfortable changing, I don't think this is a place for you. And I've worked with many employees where I've said, and now students, where I say, if you commit to me, I'll commit to you. If you don't know how to do it, I'll help you, but you have to commit to stepping into this space. And I try to do it as wholeheartedly as I can. Like, I meditate before. I try to get as groovy as I can with myself. But it's hard. It's a hard conversation to have. But if you go in like really believing that if they're willing to change, you're going to go in, then often they do change. Or they quit because it's annoying to change. You know, so I worked with one guy who was a designer, and I used to call him the mute, because he would just design things, and I'd be like, so you got it? Yeah. And then he'd show me a design, and he hadn't got it. You know, just, he never talked. He never asked questions. He never gave feedback. He just said, and one day I was like, I don't care anymore. Like, you are doing things wrong. You're delivering late. It's causing trouble. The rest of the team is furious with you. Are you going to change? Are you willing to? And he's like, nope. I was like, okay, well, you can start job hunting. He was very succinct. And he went, and we found somebody better, who was not a better designer, but was a better communicator, who produced better designs, because even though they were a worse designer, they were a better communicator, which means their designs were better. I know the weird technology thing is a nightmare. You're just going to have to decide, can you live with it or not? And if you can't, suck it up, cowboy.
Let's do one last question, and then we can break, guys.
I swear firing people always makes things better. It just sucks for a while.
So I'm sure we've all encountered when we try to make changes ourselves, sometimes our peers or teams are resistant to those changes because it's just not what they're used to. Do you have any strategies or pieces of advice for when you're the one who's trying to make the change within an organization, how to make that easier on those around you?
Definitely. There's actually a book I have profoundly mixed feelings about, but this advice is really good, which is, it's called Who's Got Your Back by Keith Ferrazzi. And he suggests that you find accountability partners. So you talk to people and you say, I'm looking to level up in this way. Can you help coach me? You know, and you could say, I really admire you. I know you're really honest. I know you're really straight shooter. Could you coach me? When you see me falling backwards in this other pattern, can you advise me? And there's this thing, you can look it up on Wikipedia, it's called the Benjamin Franklin effect, where the way you can get people to like you is by asking them to help you. Benjamin Franklin used to say, ask someone to borrow a book and they'll love you forever. And I'm like, okay. But it turns out that by asking people to help you, they will change their mind shift and they'll be more caring. So if you're trying to become something that you haven't been historically, you can invite a few people to help you. In fact, the person who's most resistant might be your best coach, because they might just not know that it's even something that matters to you and something that grows. So that's my advice. Try it out. If it doesn't work, yell at me on Twitter. Thanks.
All right, let's give Christina a big round of applause here.
Thank you, guys.